a little on the nose. The song "Spirit in the Sky" to start us off and kind of get us through that first minute of stalling there. But good morning, everybody from Southern California. I am Jessie Birschbach, Senior Spirits Editor for the Tasting Panel magazine. Hello, and welcome to our Spectrum of Spirits webinar. I know as professionals, we're already familiar with the fundamentals of the spirit industry's core categories, right? Although the basics are the basics, the world of distillates is always changing. And not to mention that most of these categories, especially one of them in particular, and all of them for that matter, but one of them in particular, whiskey, we'll get to in a sec, but goes into great depth. Think about it. You've got Canadian, Irish, bourbon, Scotch, and Japanese, and then there are subcategories of that category. So rye, barrel finishing, single malt, whatever, what have you. And that's why we've invited some really cool, really sharp spirit industry experts, each representing their own respective category and subcategory. But before, of course, I introduce our first guest, I should say thanks, as always, to the Chief, Meredith May, our Editor-in-Chief and Publisher, Meredith May, along with Mr. Chief, our Head Marketing Guy, Bill Brandel. Thanks to both of you for putting this all together. As a reminder, this will be recapped in the September-October Tasting Panel issue. And to our audience members, if you have a question, please feel free to include them in our chat feature. Panelists, you're also welcome to leave your email so that any of our audience members can connect directly with you in case they're interested in your brand for their beverage program. So let's get right into it because I'm excited. I kind of laid this out as if we were tasting, in real life. So sort of from lighter to darker, from drier to sweeter, that sort of thing. And in this case, with the set that we have today, we're gonna go into a gin fact. So gin is defined as a neutral-based spirit flavored with a range of botanicals, namely what? Juniper berry, right? And then, of course, that's redistilled. There's a range of styles within gin, right? Old Tom, London Dry, Plymouth are the main characters. I think I'm missing one. What is it? Geneva. But I have industry veteran Jeff Curley, founder and CEO of Gin Lane. I feel like I've got to say it in a British accent, right? Gin Lane 1751. Actually, that was more Australian, but I'll keep trying. Anyway, to tell us about his Victorian style gin, Jeff, how do you first tell me, how do you define the Victorian style of gin?
Yeah, so hi everyone, great to meet you that I can't see, but you can see my rosy cheeks on my rosy shirt. Yeah, so Victorian style or gin lane itself, and I'm just going to share my screen as we roll right into this. But gin lane, yeah, here's a picture of the range that I have that I'll go into. And gin lane is what I call a very accurate and relevant to the Victorian era. So there isn't a Victorian style gin, as Jessie laid out, London Dry, Old Tom, or specific styles within gin. My gin is just a great reflection of what gin was like when gin became the reformed spirit that we drink today. So I really tried hard in making this in not only the country, England, but the city, London, itself. So I make this at Thames Distillers, and it's sort of the architect behind the style is Charles Maxwell. He's the owner and the founder of Thames Distillers, 8th generation distiller. The guy just has gin flowing through his veins. He's probably the most well-regarded living ginsmith today. And we created what gin was like when it came to be, which is obviously juniper, and then star anise forward, which is the licorice flavor. So we've got a great sort of balance of the juniper, which obviously comes off very Christmas tree pine flavor, but with star anise that gives it a little bit more savoriness and a little bit sweetness. So yeah, so that's Gin Lane. My inspiration, not sure if any of you are like British historians or historic fact aficionados, but this was a famous, these two prints were created by this artist named William Hogarth in 1751 by the British government. Real quick, essentially on the left is Beer Street, which was depicting if you drank beer, the native spirit to England, you were healthy, which meant you were full-bodied, you were artistic, you were smart, and if you drank gin, which the government didn't have a regulation or a hold on, you'd become destitute and you'd become, you know, poor and eating your dog's bone right out of their dish. Gin Lane is not supposed to depict this horrible look and feel of what gin was, but this was the most pivotal, important time and prints that came out. It was the first sort of anti-drug awareness campaign by the Brits. So this is the inspiration. These are very, very famous prints. Hogarth was a very famous artist in England, but this is where the inspiration comes from. I use 8 very traditional botanicals. So I'm not going to read them word for word. They're right in front of you here. As Jesse mentioned, by definition, gin needs to have a dominant, a predominant, the biggest flavor should be juniper. That's the definition. That's how it was made back in the day, and that's how it was defined. Yet there's been some new iterations of that, less juniper forward, maybe a herb or a spice or ingredient that might be indigenous to a certain part of the world or where that distillery sits. So that's Charles in his very fancy British blue jacket and his tie. That's the distillery. Tom Thumb and Thumbelina are the 2 stills that we use. It's a traditional style. So this is a seep and macerate, just like you do with the tea bag. So they go into a big still. The stills are heated up. You know, it takes about 22 hours for the herbs and spices to fully let off everything that they have. And as it's heated up, it produces vapor. That vapor comes off that swan neck that you see in every picture of a still. And that is where the concentrated gin comes from and comes off of. And all gins typically come off concentrated. So Gin Lane comes off at about 82.5% alcohol, and then you reduce it down to whatever bottle strength that you want. So here's sort of my core range. I've essentially got 3 styles: London Dry, a pink gin, and an Old Tom. And again, I won't read these word for word, but my classic London Dry to the left, the light blue label, that's 80% alcohol, very well balanced, has all the beautiful notes of what a London Dry should have. The Royal Strength, which is not a classification, I made up that term because it's royal blue. There's a royal family. And I wanted to differentiate between something higher proof. So the Royal Strength is 94 proof. So 47%, bigger, bolder, stronger. Whenever you have less water in gin, it's going to create more concentrated botanical flavor. So this is big and bold, a true style of gin for someone who loves the unadulterated, flavor of gin. I've got a real pink gin. And when I say a real pink gin by definition is gin infused with Angostura bitters. So that's exactly what I use. There's nothing else added to it. It's not sweet or fruity. It's dry. It has this very beautiful herbal kind of savory finish to it. And then I've got an Old Tom. Old Tom style just means a sweetened gin. So we just sweeten it, and most gin makers make their Old Tom with just good old granulated sugar. We add a little bit higher note of star anise to it that gives it a little bit more sweeter profile from one of the actual spices that's in it. So those are the 4 core. I launched these 2 recently. These are sort of extensions as sort of limited summer or seasonal releases. So I've got a violet gin that takes on a very creme de violet flavor in note. So it is, I do add a little bit of sugar, so it is sweeter. But think 40% London Dry gin meets creme de violet. So it's great for aviations. It's great for like a violet gin fizz, which is a classic cocktail. Great with just lemon, a squeeze of lemon or gin and tonic. And then I have a cucumber watermelon mint. These two flavors were my way of adding a little innovation to a very classic, range, and then bespoke flavors that no other gins out there have. There are other purple colored gins. Some don't taste purple in terms of what the color would dictate, but there are lavender and lilac gins that are out there. And I have seen a couple other violets, but not many. And then cucumber watermelon mint, I think I'm the only brand that actually has that profile. So these are exactly what it says. These are added post distillation, sort of what Hendrick's does. So Hendrick's begins as a London Dry, and then they add their cucumber and their rose essence after. These flavors are added after. So it's essentially my London Dry gin as the base with these added and then reduced down with water. A real quick mention, since I launched the brand, I do a big fundraiser every year for breast cancer during October. Something that I did when I launched the brand about 5 years ago. I've had some close family relatives pass away from it. I'm sure everybody listening knows somebody directly or indirectly. But what I do is I essentially donate half of what I make during September, October of everything I sell to bars, restaurants, retailers, online. So hopefully you guys will support who are listening in at your bar, restaurant, or retail location in a state that I'm distributed in, but all for a great cause. And then I'm not going to read this word for word. There'll be a copy of this presentation, I think, recorded, and then also the presentations that we have. But this just kind of recaps a little bit of some unique tidbits of the brand itself, and then kind of going through each SKU and just pointing out some of the stuff that I spoke about.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you so much, Jeff. And also, it looks like you've got a question in the Q&A. Someone was wanting to know the proof of the Victoria and the Old Tom. And actually, I was curious too, because I've heard of Navy strength, but the Royal is a cool way to put it, the ABV for the Royal.
Yeah. So everything other than the Royal is 40% 80 proof, and then the Royal's 47. And the Royal started out as a Navy, and most listening might know, but Navy strength has to be 56.5%. It can't be anything more or less. Yeah. Why? Because that was what was written in the book way back when. Right. It could have lit gunpowder if it was 53% or 67%. So my Royal strength is a little bit tamer than a Navy strength. Navy strength is very aggressive and very
too much for me sometimes. If I'm
it's hard to tame.
Yeah. Awesome, Jeff. Thank you so much.
Great.
I won't embarrass myself anymore with my British accent, and we'll move on. We'll move on to Mr. Dustin Schweitzer, but first, a tequila fact. Okay, or actually this might be an opinion, really. Tequila from the Highlands, otherwise known as Los Altos, often has like a grassier, sometimes sweeter flavor profile, while those from the lowland, the Valle, can have an earthier, more mineral quality. So that's a very, very general and, sometimes even biased sort of generalization. But regardless of where it is from, I can tell you that Tequila Cabal's Blue Agave is in fact organic. Is that right, Dustin? So here to tell us more about that is Dustin Schweitzer, COO, Director of Business Development for Cabal Tequila. Hello, Dustin.
Hey guys, how's everybody doing? Really appreciate the opportunity to be here. Let me share my screen real quick. Get this lined up. So my name is Dustin Schweitzer. I'm Chief Operating Officer and Director of Business Development for Tequila Cabal. Super happy to be here with everybody today. I'll quickly jump into it. My business partner and founder of our brand, Everardo Gonzalez Jr., his family has been agaveros, agave farmers since 1911. Their history in the raising of Blue Weber agave is generational, and the ties to not only the land, but our distillery is familial. He unfortunately couldn't be here on this panel this morning, so I'm filling in to tell you a little bit about what Cabal means, a little bit about our production style, and what makes us unique. And I'll jump into what Jesse said about highlands and lowlands, because we think we have the best of both worlds. So I'll quickly read this poem because it's kind of the foundation for our brand's ethos. I am Cabal, I am Tequila Cabal, made for the love of tequila, those who drink for taste and not for effect. Careful, methodical, precise tequila production, smooth yet bold. We do this to build on the life's work of our ancestors. We are free, independent thinkers. Through our merit, we earn our marks in the world. Cabal connects authentic, like-minded people, bold and intelligent mavericks, and classy provocateurs. For they know class, freedom, and truth is never purchased and always earned. So we're based out of Amatitan de Jalisco, Mexico. Amatitan is actually to be called the birthplace of tequila. People tend to say it's tequila, but they moved it to tequila because it was a more marketable name and just made more sense. But Tequila Cabal is made in Amatitan, which is the birthplace. Like I mentioned, my business partner's family has been agave farmers since 1911. We have over 2,200 acres of single estate organic Blue Weber agave, anywhere from 1,200 meters up to 1,800 meters. And so every time we harvest, the term terroir is certainly in play, because every harvest we do is from a single estate and such microclimates are in play. So on some harvests that could be a little higher in elevation, you might get a little bit more of that sweeter profile, a little grassier profile that Jesse was alluding to. And the ones that are lower elevation tend to be a little bit more minerality. Sure, there are debates about it, but consistently Blue Weber from the highlands does tend to be a little sweeter, and stuff from the lowlands does tend to be a little bit more minerality. Now, as for what Cabal means and what it stands, if we go back here, you can see the bottle is in the shape of a horse head. That's not random at all. Our bottle is in the shape of a horse head for two reasons. One, our business partner in Mexico's family raises horses for competition. They have over 21 horses on their ranch in Hidalgo, and they've won many national awards for charreria, which is similar to American dressage. And the reason why we put our tequila in a horse bottle is because, one, it pays homage to their family legacy and to the craft that they have created by raising these beautiful, majestic creatures. But also it pays homage and is symbolic for the type of patient culture that it takes to raise a horse to win national awards. And why that's important to us is, as I mentioned, we're single estate and we don't buy agave from anybody else. And in order to raise organic tequila, you can't use pesticides. You have to go through the land, hand till it. And so that's also another very type of patient culture that comes from Jalisco that it takes to raise an organic single estate tequila. In Spanish, when something's perfect, it's done just right, es cabal. And it's also the root word of caballero, and which means gentleman. Gentlemen typically ride noble steeds. And for us, we wanted to create a beautiful presentation of 100% Blue Weber organic tequila and put it in a gorgeous bottle. The stigma is beautiful bottle, shitty juice, pardon my French, but we wanted the best of both worlds to honor the legacy and the framework and foundation of all the people and generations that put their hard-earned work into making this beautiful product. So we marry traditional processes with old processes. If you noticed in the poem, it's honoring the legacy of our ancestors. But in order to honor our legacy of our ancestors, they would want us to continue to innovate and move forward by honoring and bringing some of the past into the future. And so we do have some traditional methods that we use. We still bake in a stone brick oven built in 1911, 32 ton. And we bake for 42 hours. A lot of brands are moving into autoclave and diffuser use. We're moving to our new distillery with the same family here in a couple weeks. We now have two 32-ton brick ovens, and we will never go away from stone brick oven baking, because we believe that with our single estate agave and a long baking process, what you get is an incredibly caramelized agave when it comes out of the oven. Our tequila tends to be, especially our Blanco, a little sweeter. And the reason being is we employ a technique called crop rotation. In between each harvest, we plant corn and alfalfa to allow the soil to reset for an entire year. We don't exhaust the land. We actually invest time and money into the land so that harvest after harvest and plot to plot, we're producing obviously a slightly different profile, but the highest quality agave possible. We bake for 42 hours. We ferment for 72, which is also quite long nowadays. And we distill over 5 tanks stainless steel with copper coil. And we're excited about the transition to our new distillery because we'll be finishing now in copper pot, copper coil for the finish. Our barreling program is super unique. We handpick all our barrels. Our Reposado lives anywhere from 3 to 4 months. We've played around with 7 months. We've kind of found the sweet spot after kind of our 5th ideation of it, somewhere in the 4 to 7 month range. Our current batch is a barrel blend between Buffalo Trace, Woodford Reserve, and Old Forester. Single-use premium barrels. We don't believe in exhausted barrel use. So, and they're barrel wet, bourbon wet. I'm sorry, our tequila hits those barrels within 30 days after leaving the bourbon distillery. We're super excited because we just signed an exclusive deal with Willet. So everything coming out from Tequila Cabal in the fall and spring and summer of next year will be Willet aged bourbon barrels with our single estate organic tequila. Our añejo, we've pushed as high as 18 months. We've found the sweet spot to be between 12 and 14. It really is just a really robust and well-rounded añejo. It finishes with a ton of cooked agave. We want to still, a lot of brands, you know, they push their age expressions to the limit. You can take an añejo to 3 years. We don't really believe in that because at the end of the day, you're drinking an agave spirit and you still want the agave to be present. If you don't want agave and you want to push it to 3 years, I say, hey, jump over to whiskey. And that's, you know, a great spirit too. But we always want to have agave at some point in the palate of our expressions. And the añejo still shines through really, really beautifully on the finish. Some of the things that we talk about with our brand, one of them is being the good you do today will be forgotten tomorrow, do good anyway. It's part of our brand ethos in that, you know, I'm showing a picture of the Koa and the agave. You're never going to taste the tequila and be like, oh my God, that Ajimador made amazing incisions. I can taste it. But he's going to do it right every time. He's going to be precise about it. He's going to be focused because actually the angle of cut, how much you leave on, impacts how that agave bakes in the oven. And so if you're, and this is very, very hard labor. If you're not skilled at this and you just chop it up, you're going to have an uneven bake, and that's going to, and then transition into, you know, a pour maceration process. And then we have a very, very, very special limited run that we did when we started. The first lot of Blanco we put in barrels back in 2018. We produced 1,800 of these extra añejo. It's aged for 3.5 years. It's in a custom black, matte black horsehead bottle. We only are releasing 50 a month, and that's because of the limited allocation that we have. We will not be releasing any more extra añejo until 2025. And the reason being is that we're focused on scaling our brand in a capacity that's focusing on our core line. And we want to now transition into the 288 barrels that we're securing from Willet and setting aside about 10% of that for extra añejo in the future. So if you see this bottle in the wild, or if someone is pouring it for you, you are drinking one of the rarest spirits in the world. I promise you it's a treat. It's really beautiful and elegant. And the label is 3-day vat, vegetable tan, leather label at a Leon, Mexico. Same producers as Allen Edmonds, Ferragamo, Fry, Dolce & Gabbana. It is a masterpiece, and it is very well priced, and it is certainly a treat if you can experience it or get your hands on it.
It's a handsome looking bottle. So you're well over your time there, Justin. Great. Is there anything you want to leave us with before we kick you off?
I will leave you with this beautiful image of my business partners' beautiful horses in Mexico here on the last slide. These are the Scaramuzas, and these are the beautiful women that trained many years to present such majestic creatures to a big audience. Thanks for your time.
Awesome. And what a cool concept. That's, you know, crop rotation is really interesting, and it speaks to the care that is happening, you know, with your humidors and the agave fields.
I dropped my email in the chat. I may have to jump off soon, but my email's there if anybody has any further questions or would love to connect. Our door's open.
Cool. So for those asking for his contact info, just scroll up to the top, and
I'll drop it again right now too.
Cool. Okay. Great. Awesome.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Dustin, so much. So now that we have gone from tequila, we're going to go into whiskey, and I'm going to hit you with a little bit of bourbon sort of general setup. So we're talking about whiskey spelled with an EY, right? Because we're not referring to Scotch at the moment. And that is distilled or fermented grains like barley, both malted and unmalted. And then you've got corn, wheat, oatmeal, you know, there are some others in there. And as most of you probably know, in order to be called bourbon, the mash bill must be at least 51% corn, right? And there are a few other requirements, but I'll let the very sweet and charming Rich Anders, owner of Mash Build, tell us more about that. Hi, Rich.
Hello, that's very nice. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, so bourbon is America's native spirit. So much like tequila is the native spirit of Mexico, you know, it's the U.S. spirit. So it has to be 51% corn, made in brand new charred oak barrels, distilled at no more than 160 proof, put in the barrel at no more than 125 proof, and it can't be cut to any less than 80 proof, which was the standard for quite a long time. I've always been a great big fan of bourbon, and I started off in the industry in beer, then moved to wine, and was in wine for a very long time. And then my love of bourbon caught up to me, and I went to work for a very large bourbon corporation. And it was when I was there that I just started noticing, you know, there was people doing a lot of the same things with different mashes and different ages, different chars on the oak, but pretty consistent in each one of their expressions, being sour mash, which you'll hear about a sweet mash later on, I think, from Hard Truth. And so in tasting one that went down the middle of my palate and was beautiful, but it just really reminded me of 100% Cabernet. And coming from wine when blending was becoming such an important part of what winemaking was doing, and the Meritages and the red blends were becoming really hot because of what they did in the palate, it made me think how neat it would be to create a bourbon that wasn't a single mash bill, but that was a compilation of a number of different mash bills. And then started thinking about it, you know, ports, sherries, rums, and how they use a Solera process. And I'm like, wow, not only different mash bills, but different ages. And so that got me thinking. I actually brought that up to the big company I was working for. They looked at me and said, that's a great idea, but we would have a revolt because the amount of work it would take. And so I kind of put it in the back of my head and said, if I ever leave this job, which at the time I was like, this is the greatest job ever, why would I leave? But if I ever leave this job, you know, that's something that would be really cool. A couple years later, things got pretty corporate, and I was like, okay, it's we're all butting heads. And so I took 401k and started buying some barrels for a base of a Solera. And so bought some pretty old barrels. And so the oldest stuff was distilled in 2000. And so the base is from very large distilleries. And my goal was always, coming from a large place, I didn't want to try to compete head to head. I was like, you know, I want to do things that are different. So I want to do things that are very difficult for very large companies to do and create value. But I've also got to price myself where that value's at. So I was lucky I bought a lot of stuff before the prices started going crazy. But that was the beginning of it. I created a brand called the Stewart Solera, got great accolades. Everybody loved it. Hired an artist to paint this beautiful picture of my vision of the Solera. It was a little artistic in that it wasn't exactly how it looked, but it was really pretty. Put it on the shelf and nobody knew what it was. And I was like, okay, what I'm going to do is put what we do on the label. And so with that, I'll kind of move forward. So this is a blend of straight bourbons. And it is the minimum we put on the labels 2 years for flexibility. And I actually, for some of the things, wish we could go less, but because it's straight bourbon, it has to be a minimum of 2 years. And straight bourbon also has to be aged together for a season, which is undefined. Most people consider that to be a summer. And so we do a blend of straight bourbon with a lot of different mash bills and ages from 2 to a little over 22 now years old. And I think we have a really good flavor profile, but hopefully everybody will try some and you guys can let me know on your own what you think. But that was the thought process moving into it. Started off in Colorado, where I grew up, and so wanted to do that home and everything else. And when my mom passed of coincidentally of breast cancer, my wife had taken her, we took her in to live with us. And so we ended up going to Missouri. So now I have 2 distilleries, one in Missouri and one in Colorado still that we're just expanding. So you're looking at the one in Missouri that we own and built. And so that's the Washington Distilling Company. That does have a tasting room, as you can see. And this is, again, the one in Missouri. We also have, like I said, the one in Colorado, but I didn't get a chance to get out and take pictures. After looking at the other presentations, please forgive me. I would fire our marketer, but unfortunately that would leave us with no one really there other than a couple of distillers, because I'm the marketer. So I apologize for the quality of the slides. So as I said, basically.
I'm so sorry. Are you, we can't see your presentation.
Oh, you
I just
can't?
realized, no. Yeah. Have you shared your screen, or do you want me to quickly do that for you?
I did share it, but I'll try it again.
I'm so sorry. I didn't realize that.
No, that's good.
Until about halfway through.
No, that's good. I don't know why it's not sharing, but I'll try it again. Is that sharing?
No, not seeing it. Here we go.
Okay.
There we go. Awesome.
So there it is. And I'll put it on. Sorry about that.
No, that's okay. I'm sorry I didn't.
No, my fault. So anyways, there it is. I'm trying to go quick because I know we're already behind. Tasting room, obligatory stills, barrels, basic philosophy. So we don't empty barrels. Things are always aging. So the only barrels we empty are things that we're storing off-site. We've got a few places we're storing, although we did just empty one of them in Kentucky, but we still have Illinois and obviously Colorado and Missouri as well. So here's a picture of the label and the idea of what happens in a Solera. Solera process is taking from the oldest barrel and moving the next oldest down into it, and then taking the third oldest and moving it into the second. And so the mash build that you're looking at now is a vertical through the Solera. And we also do a pure Solera barrel, which is called Evans and Pike. It's our Solera Reserve. And so this is, again, the way to get all of these different products. So you can look on the front of the label is all the different mash bills. We name our barrels after the years they come in, so you can have without being illegal and giving a vintage on a spirit. We name the barrels, but you can get a pretty good idea of the ages of some of the different ones. So we have, in that first very standard, we have barrel 2000, 04, 06, and 14. and then you can move on down and see. In Colorado, we started in the bottom middle. You can see some of the things that we have distilled through partners and relationships. And then we've got some more stuff that will be added here shortly from things that we've been doing. Had to move a couple times and expand, so that's cut us in, but it's never been about what we do. It's been about the blend and the value. So again, we've had 93, 92, 50 best, a bunch of different nice scores, all from blind tastings. And then on the backside, you can see that we do different percentages. And so you'll see that on the different batches, you can see which layer they are. In the two things that were really important to me was being honest. We're not trying to tell anybody that we're producing everything we make. That's not the point of what we do. I've worked with some really amazing, and have guys working for me that are really amazing distillers too. So I don't want to disparage them. But the thought is, let's try and find the best stuff and the most interesting stuff, and then blend it together and create something that's unique. And hopefully, and to my palate, it is very full on the palate. And the idea was, if I like it and nobody else does, then at least I'll have a lot of stuff I can drink. So
yeah.
We do some other things too. We've been getting some really good awards on other products. We do some finishes. The finishes we do under the mash bill label, they're not the oldest part of that, but we do finish in what we try and find is the greatest examples of finishing barrels. Our cognac, which got a gold medal, is a 25-year-old XO cognac barrel. We've got 20-year-old Tawny Port. We've got 6 and 12-year-old rum barrels from Barbados. We have, if we do 100% pure Kona coffee, where we put the beans in the barrel with the bourbon. So just trying to do a lot of unique things. My last thing I'll say, first of all, here's my information. The last thing I'll say is that we will be coming up out with a partnership brand that will be estate grown. We're going to start with one farm, but it will expand. So we will be talking about the field where the corn, the rye, the malt, the wheat was grown, the percentage, the distillation proof, the barrel proof, all of that on the label so that you can see it. The reason it's all on the label is I don't have enough for marketing to do that. So we just try and make it really easy for people to do it. And which is why I'm very appreciative to have this opportunity, and thank you guys for having me, and hopefully I made my time.
Yeah, just a little bit over, but we're okay, Rich. We love having you, and that sounds like this recent endeavor sounds like a true grain to glass kind of thing. So I'll be looking forward to that. And we have someone asking what markets you are in.
So right now we're in Colorado pretty deeply. We just kicked off Kansas and Missouri. New York is, I think, going to be doing a little bit. And then we're in discussions about trying to get in a few other markets in limited amounts. But really, it's just been those three right now. Colorado, Missouri, and Kansas.
Gotcha. Okay. Great. Well, thank you again.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Of course. So I've got a little more whiskey background for you. Although 95% of bourbon is made from Kentucky, it doesn't have to be made there to legally be called bourbon, right? So, and I believe Cooperstown Distillery, located in Otsego County, New York, actually makes a bourbon, but with grain sourced mostly from the state of New York. I could, here to confirm or deny or update this is Gene Mara, owner distiller of Cooperstown Distillery. Hi, Gene.
Hi. Thanks for having me today. It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah, I'll answer that question real quickly because it's so easy. All of our grains are sourced from a 4th generation farmer who's literally 30 minutes up the road. And cool. So we get everything from him except for our malted barley, which comes from an area a little bit higher north in latitude, closer to Rochester, because barley just doesn't like central New York that much.
Yeah.
So although it's nice to point out right now, I guess, since we're sort of on the grain departure, that back in the colonial era, New York was the breadbasket for the colonial states. So most of the wheat, rye, barley, everything was grown in New York for a considerable amount of time during the Revolutionary period. So anyway, thanks again. A lot to cover here. Since Rich went over time, I'm going to take the liberty to go way over time, Rich. No, I'm only kidding. I'll try and keep it at my minimum here. So we've been in business coming up on 9 years in 2 months. So we started the business in 2013. We have a plethora of brands and SKUs. They're on that first slide there. We make just about everything. In fact, probably everything except for tequila or mezcal, whatever. So we really kind of have branched out into lots of different areas of distilling and distillation, but our core focus is always our whiskeys, and in particular, the top 4 that you see on that slide, which is the Cooperstown Select Series. But give me the next slide. But we want to show you a little bit about where we are. We're in the beautiful bucolic village of Cooperstown. Obviously, most of you know, home to the Baseball Hall of Fame. And that's really kind of why we're here in a sense. 11, 12 years ago, when I first ventured into the distilling realm, I decided that Cooperstown might be a great opportunity to marry sports and spirits. Sports and beer, of course, has been done in the past frequently, of course, but I thought it was a great opportunity to marry sports and spirits. And that spawned the great baseball bottle, which shows here on this slide. So the baseball bottle in the middle was our first iteration of a sports decanter. That's really kind of what we started to venture into other states. And by the way, we are now in 25 states. So we're growing rapidly. We then have added in the last 3 to 4 months along this sports decanter lineup, which we now have umbrellaed under a Hall of Champions brand. On the left is our new football bottle, which has been out about 6 months, and our great golf bottle, which has been out about the same amount of time. And in about 3 months, we're going to be releasing a basketball bottle. So we're going to have all the sports covered, all the seasons covered. We're going to really try and push into the States with seasonal opportunities in these decanters. So these have been low-hanging fruit for us, but really and truly, this is how we kind of get the knock on the door into the market. But it's the bread and butter is really our Cooperstown Select Series. So specific to today's topic, I thought we could focus on the Cooperstown Straight Single Malt, which is 100% New York State, again, local grains, a little further up than our 30-mile radius with our farmer, but nonetheless, all New York State. Just came off some serious awards in the last 3 weeks. That's why it's up there. It's fresh news, fresh press release. We also won for our packaging a couple months back for the football bottle and decanter bottle, the golf bottle. So both of those bottles have won double golds for packaging, but the prestigious award for us was to be recognized as New York State Single Malt Distillery of the Year in the New York International Spirits Competition. So that's our black label. And we kind of, think that we were late to the game in a sense with single malt, but everything is starting to age a little bit longer. By the way, we added 8,000 square feet 2 years ago, predominantly to enhance our rickhouse capacity. We're now at 1,500 barrels. And it's nice because being 9 years old, we can now delve into some older liquid, which is hard to find sometimes, but it's there. But most of what's in this straight single malt is about 2.5 years old. Some of it's closer to 3. But the story on this is that we found some Mexican sherry casks about 1.5 years ago. And we bought half a dozen or more. And I was surprised at what I saw when I looked inside these sherry casks, because there was about 1.5 inches of caramelized sugars from the sherry. And I thought, wow, this is going to be interesting. Well, little did I know that it was the defining part of what makes this straight single malt so great. It spends about a year or close to a year most of the time in that sherry cask, and it's picking up a tremendous amount of these profiles that comes from this caramelized vein that courses through the whole barrel, all the staves. The color on this is unbelievably dark, and I attribute it predominantly to that sherry cask because they're very, very heavily charred. And Mexican sherry, I wasn't even aware was a thing, but obviously there's some wineries down in the Baja region that are making some sherry. So it was a fortuitous purchase for us. We love the packaging on all of our Cooperstown Select bottles. Go to the next one. They are all kind of mimicking in some way. It's kind of a stretch, but Johnnie Walker, the blue, the black, the green, the red, and even a gold. The gold is our first 5-year-old we've ever released, which is extraordinary liquid. We didn't make a lot of it, but we will be bottling a 6-year-old coming up this fall, this winter. So that's our Select series, which I think is the flagship of our distillery and kind of emulates what we think New York State is all about in the whiskey category and in particular bourbon. And I want to be kind of like one day known as the spokesperson for the articulation of New York State bourbon, because I think it's vastly different than any other bourbon that's coming out from any other state, and in particular, of course, Kentucky bourbon, which is obviously the most predominant bourbon on the shelves, but in many ways does not come close to the structure, the profile, the layers, the dimension, the complexities that you get out of a New York bourbon. So all of these whiskeys, again, are 100% New York State. The mash bills are, of course, different depending on the spirit. The straight single malt is, of course, 100% malted barley. The Red Label bourbon is a very interesting mash bill. It's a 4-grain mash. By the way, it's all 3-year-old in there and some 4-year-old. It's a 4-grain mash. Probably the most unique characteristic of that mash bill, however, is that we use a fairly significant percentage of oats. We love what oats does to the finish, the middle palate of this bourbon. It gives it a very creamy, rich, unctuous texture. And so we really like oats. As far as I can ascertain, nobody else is using oats. Buffalo Trace used it for a while, I think, way back. They discontinued that. I don't know why, because I think oats are phenomenal. Anyway, that's a 4-grain mash, and it's probably our most successful whiskey. Right behind that is the Green Label Rye, which is an interesting rye and an interesting New York story as well. In fact, this is the way my brain works, so I'm going to go off on a little tangent here, but all of our New York State whiskeys are a true New York pedigree, in as much as even the whiskey, the liquid, is aged in a New York coopered barrel. We happen to have one of the finest coopers in North America, in my opinion. Up the road, about an hour and 10 minutes. He makes a tremendous, tremendous barrel. He was an apprentice for the Drouhin family in Burgundy for many years. He parlayed that into his own business because he's from this area in upstate New York. He's an engineer also, so he created some proprietary equipment. He uses very interesting technology in the way he prepares a barrel, and it's all 4 to 5 year old Midwestern, particularly Missouri, air dried oak, no kiln dried oak. So we think his barrel imparts a great amount of complexity to our whiskeys, and of course adds to the New York story. So back to the rye. The rye is also local grains again from up the road, little town called Canajoharie, by the way, if anybody knows this area in central New York, on the way to Albany. It's an 80% rye, 20% corn. And the reason we do that is I learned a long time ago that rye is kind of a very difficult grain to get a lot of flavor and extract and profile from. It's a little lean. And I think some of even the very good 100% ryes out there, and there are many, by the way, They just drink they finish real quickly. They're on the lean side. There's not a lot of texture, not a lot of mouthfeel. So we added 20% corn when we've experimented, of course, with 10, 15, and ended up with 20. And we love this ratio. We think the corn sort of greases, if you will, the profiles in the rye, opens up the rye portals. And this rye is also, as I said, a great New York story because it spends about a year finishing in Long Island Cabernet barrels, which I think also adds a tremendous amount of complexity to the finished palate. So it's a great rye. It's proofed at 102 for a reason. So we are.
Speaking of rye, you're over your time. Is there anything you want to leave us with?
Sure. Next slide. We've won between all of our SKUs over 40 gold medals in the last 9 years. Everybody's got a lot of gold medals, I'm sure, but we're real proud of it. We're real proud about the New York story more than anything, I think. We also have 2 satellite tavern stores that the New York State Farm Distillery license allows us to employ. So we're happy with that too. We love being in New York. We love what the New York whiskey world is evolving into, and we're delighted to be one of the forerunners in that category.
You know, I was going to say, you are said you wanted to be the foremost spokesperson for New York bourbon and whiskey, and I don't know of any other better. So we're proud to have you, Gene.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah, and that's so fascinating to me too that a lot of whiskey distillers don't use oatmeal as much, because I know that in brewing, oatmeal is used a lot, to give the beer that smooth, rounded, creamy character. And so, I wonder, I want to look into that now. Who else is using oatmeal as a grain? When we have another question for you. She says she loves that you're sourcing everything locally, including the barrels. She wants to know if you're available in Vegas or only on the East Coast.
You want me to answer that?
Yes, please.
Yes, we're in California right now, and our California distributor, we are literally putting the final touches on an Arizona and Nevada license that he also sells into. So we should be in Nevada, of course, Vegas shortly. I don't know, maybe a month or 2.
Awesome. Great. So we touched on Gene's rye, and now we're going to maybe talk about another rye and probably a rum too. But, like bourbon, rye whiskey needs to be at least 51% rye, right? Except, corn, switch out the corn for the rye, and aged in new charred oak barrels. And unlike bourbon or any whiskey for that matter, rum is distilled not from grain, but from fermented sugarcane or molasses, right? So here to tell us about both the rye and whiskey and rum categories is Tim O'Brien, founding partner of Hard Truth Distilling. Hello, Tim.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Of course.
Yeah, so I'm from Hard Truth Distilling Company. We're located in Nashville, Indiana, which is in Brown County. And obviously one of the first questions we get asked is why we're called Hard Truth. And a fun way to kind of express that is to give my definition of why we're called Hard Truth Distilling Company. And for me, Hard Truth is embodied by the notion that anything worth doing in life is achieved by putting in a lot of hard work, and that's just kind of the hard truth. So that's what I like to tell people when I get asked that question. And then we've got our fun little slogan, to the truth and where it takes us. So that's just a driving force for us that helps us continue down the road and grow the business. So one fun thing about Hard Truth Distilling Company is where we're located. I mentioned Nashville, Indiana, and it happens to be a tourist town here in Indiana, where we've got a lot of state parks and little shops and a lot of fun things that draw people to the area. And we built our distillery on 365 acres in the woods here in Brown County. And so our distillery there, you can kind of see in the center, we're just tucked right in the middle of the forests here in Brown County. And we like to feel like it's a living assertion of our brand. It houses our distillery. It also has a full service restaurant, an outdoor terrace, which has live music. We've got a whole bunch of different tour options, including ATV rides that'll take you through the woods and make various stops along the way, and mixology classes. So a lot of interactive things for people to experience while they visit us. And a little bit of our history, we started actually Heartooth Distilling Company in 2015. Originally, we actually started our business in 2009 as a brewery, and that's why I have a beard and how I earned my keep in the early days of the business. So I was our brewer, and as we grew, we were actually able to get an artisan distiller's permit that the state of Indiana established. We knew we wanted to get into this distilling because we're craftspeople. We like to try new things, and we get bored pretty easily. So jumping into distilling was a great springboard from the foundation we had laid with the brewing. So in 2015, we started distilling in just a small operation that was adjacent to one of our restaurants, because we also have restaurants as part of our business. And we actually took over our old small brewery to be able to start distilling. And we really spent the first 3 years just learning the craft. And then in 2018 is when we established the distillery that I previously talked about, that's on the 325 acres. We have a 14-inch Vendome continuous column. We also have a 250-gallon pot still with a vodka column attached to it. So we're able to produce quite a bit of product. We have a 4,000 barrel rack house. You can kind of see in the background of the slide here that we do store vertically, and it's a single story rack house. And we have another rack house on the way that is a little more than double that size. So we're looking forward to the expansions of the ability to store more barrels, because that 4,000 barrel rack house is just about full. So then we kind of look at our lineup of brands, and in the middle there is a Sweet Mash, and we're going to talk about that just in a moment. We also have a lot of other products that, as you're growing a spirits brand, help keep on the lights while you're waiting for those barrels to patiently age. And we'll hit on the rum here at the end, but we've got a lot of fun products, but the one we're really excited about is the Sweet Mash that you see in the middle. That is our Sweet Mash Rye Whiskey. We are a Sweet Mash distillery. What that really means is we're not a sour mash distillery. We start fresh every time. So every batch of our whiskey starts with fresh yeast, fresh grains, fresh water, and using a lot of the same principles. I like to say I learned as a brewer, we clean our equipment and start with a sterile environment for the next batch. And that just allows us, in our minds, the Sweet Mash process, you get a lot more sense of the grain, the flavors you get from the base ingredients come across in the distillate a lot more cleanly. And Sweet Mash Rye Whiskey is it recently launched. You can see in November of 2021, we've had some positive accolades with some of the Platinum Ascot Awards and a very kind quote from from Fred Minnick, which definitely didn't hurt as we were kind of launching a new whiskey brand. And then if you kind of look at the details of the Sweet Mash Rye Whiskey, it is a 94% rye, 6% malted barley rye whiskey. And The way we do releases currently, this is our first mash bill. So there will be subsequent mash bills with different grain bills, different blends. But this initial release mash bill 1, we're releasing in 30 barrel lots. So every batch is a representation, a blend of 30 barrels, but it is released at barrel proof. So you can kind of see in general that proof ends up being around 115, but it'll vary from batch to batch. But our goal in the blending of those 30 barrels is to provide about as close to the last batch as possible in terms of flavor profile. With the sweet mash rye whiskey, it's a really, one way to kind of look at it is kind of, it's a bourbon drinker's rye in a sense. It's a very sweet rye whiskey. We do attribute that partially to the sweet mash process. We do get our grains from Indiana farmers. Our corn and rye are all grown by Indiana farmers, and our wheat actually too. We're working with farmers here in Brown County and also in some of our adjacent counties. And then some actually a little bit closer to the Evansville area, which is a little bit further away. But our grains do come from Indiana farmers. And you can kind of see some of those tasting notes kind of speak to the fact that it's a differentiated rye whiskey. It's got a lot of really bright, fruity notes that are kind of combined with some really deep kind of cream and brown sugar notes that really kind of create a pretty fun flavor profile. So really excited about that. And while I have your attention, we can talk a little bit about rum. It's a little bit funny for an Indiana distillery to be telling you about rum, but it is something that we're really proud of. And that is our toasted coconut rum. It's a really good seller for us. It's a really good bar back essential once you get liquid to lips and let people experience it. The toasted coconut rum is made from our base white rum, which is it's a black pearl molasses and cane sugar. And it's got a Caribbean strain of yeast, so it's a really clean white rum. And then we blend it with actually house roasted coconut flakes to get that toasted coconut flavor. And then of course some cane sugar and a little bit of sea salt, which really helps round out the flavor. It's kind of one of those hidden tricks that just really kind of give you a well-rounded taste for the product. And you know, we're having a lot of success with toasted coconut rum as we've expanded. We are an Indiana distillery, but we're in about 17 to 20 states right now. I kind of lose track sometimes, but we're having a lot of great success in Florida with the toasted coconut rum, which is just really fun to be serving an Indiana rum down in Florida, and you know, no one's the wiser. It is a sweet spirit, but so it kind of lends into the cordial category. But the base rum in there is a very good quality rum that we make that kind of helps create that product. And we're you know, it's kind of fun to kind of tell this sort of story as a growing distillery, because you know, a product like toasted coconut rum kind of helped make possible that sweet mash rye whiskey that I was telling you about. Because if it weren't for a product like this, it would be a lot harder to be filling a rack house with barrels over the last several years. So it really kind of helps give all our listeners a sense of the journey that we all get to kind of struggle through as we grow our business. And I'm sure all the other panelists can agree. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of hard work, and it's exciting to be able to share our products with the world. So I thank you guys for your time.
Wow, and you're under, and you gave us 2 awesome things to think about. We appreciate that, Tim.
Yeah, I told you earlier, I try not to talk too much.
I have a couple different audience members, and everyone else can chime in before we jump into our last but not least presenter. Are you guys in New Jersey? Do you know, Tim?
We aren't in New Jersey, but I do believe we're in New Hampshire and we're in Vermont, I think. Massachusetts, I believe, is another one where we are. So we're getting into New England, and we certainly would be happy to be there. We're making that slow march through New England.
And available through mail, someone's asking, like, or I'm assuming like a Drizzly, something like that. Are any of you actually? I'm curious.
Yeah, we're working on that. We don't have anything established, but that is soon to come. Direct to consumer, we're working on that. Right. Yeah,
we're in all those markets with a couple places. LibDib comes to mind, Mash and Grape. So our products are available online in virtually 30 states, 35 states.
Awesome. Okay.
And we are in New Jersey, by the way.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Gene. Okay, so he's starting to drive already. Before he does, though, I'm going to just hit you guys quickly with this sort of background on bitters or bitter. While the flavors for all the agave spirits we've just reviewed are derived from the base of the distillate and, of course, aging, the flavor of bitter comes not only from its base spirit, but also from the addition of herbs, spices, fruit, botanicals, what have you. And in the case of Botanica Angelica, its base comes from probably one of my favorite vodkas ever, Chopin. But I'll let Joel Caruso, Director of Education for Botanica Angelica, tell you which Chopin vodka in particular is used as the base and why. Hi, Joel.
Hi, how's everybody today? Round of applause, I can hear it all already. So my name is Joel Caruso, I'm the Director of Education. Thank you so much for everybody's participation today. This has been a really exciting webinar so far. I've learned a lot and a lot of new spirits here. So I'm happy to present something that's really near and dear to my heart. And it all starts back at Chopin Distillery. And here you'll see a snapshot of what we are creating at Chopin Distillery. Chopin Distillery goes all the way back to about 1896, but we have purchased it around the early 90s, somewhere around the fall of communism from the Polish government. So a little bit of backstory there. And the history all starts here in Siedlce, Poland. So a bit of an aerial shot there of the land surrounding the distillery, that iconic red smokestack there, and a little bit of a close-up here so you can just see how just magnificent this distillery really is. And I'll get into why this is so important to us, because this man right here, Tad Dorda, was the legendary godfather of the luxury category of vodka. Before Tad, vodka was never considered a luxury spirit. And in fact, there was no categorical place for a luxury vodka. It just didn't make sense at the time. And this backstory is really important because, as Jesse mentioned, we are using our rye vodka as a base spirit for this whole lineup that you're going to see here shortly. We do offer 3 vodkas, technically 4, but 3 different bases. We do a wheat, a potato, and a rye. Many people are familiar with Chopin Potato Vodka. It was the original luxury vodka, one of the first potato vodkas, and one of the only, a very few vodkas that are made from potatoes. So somewhere around 5% of all vodkas are made from potatoes just because of the labor. So Tad Dorda, he is essentially our driving force, our creative and passionate founder, genius of a man. And without further ado, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Botanica Angelica, and that's why we're all here, why we've been waiting this entire time. I know. So from left to right, we have 5 really unique spirits. We have a Amaro on the left. We have a bitter, that red one. In the center, we have our lemon. Then we have our orange, followed by our elderflower. And these are all based on our rye vodka, like I said, but all made with natural herbs and spices. How we make it, all by hand, all small batches, all starting with our award-winning rye vodka, and really over 125 years of distillation experience. In fact, our master distiller has been at the distillery since, actually it was his first job, and he's in his late 60s now. So you can imagine that he's been with us for quite some time. And it's not that we were making Chopin vodka since the 1890s. In fact, they were always making the best vodka they always could. So it was a natural progression for us to branch out into these specific modifiers. And some of these have been made for over 100 years. For instance, our Amaro, which we would technically call Czeszka in Poland, but try spelling that on a bottle and try getting your consumers to pronounce that. It's a little bit of a tough ask. So we are calling it an Amaro. It's a very unique spirit, and I'll show you exactly why. All of these are going to be mostly rested in our vats. Some of them are actually rested in neutral Polish oak. So really laborious process for some of these. And as I mentioned, all made by hand. Here's a little quick picture of our elderflowers that we are sourcing locally, drying out on these lovely straw mats, all again, made in-house and just meticulously hand finished. It is absolute labor of love for us. And there you can see in our production facility, those little neckers getting applied by hand. So it just really shows you the amount of care that we are putting into these products on a daily basis, and the fact that we're able to source those ingredients, bottle all the way to the bottle, all in-house, means that we can do QC on everything from start to finish. And having that kind of quality control really is important when you're talking about something like this. So what is Botanica Angelica? It is a natural addition to any cocktail, essentially your Batman belt for any bartender or at-home bartender that's looking to make a cocktail. With those 5 spirits, you can essentially make any cocktail that you can dream of. With our Amaro at 40% ABV, you'll see this green bottle. That's a really lovely addition to your Black Manhattans, your Italian Birds, those sort of cocktails that you want to add a little bit of that pepper or almost a caraway finish to. I get a little bit of that anise on the finish as well. Another one we really love is lemon. In Poland, they've been making this for a really long time as well. We call it Lemon Tree over there. It's a little bit different in the States, a little bit lower alcohol here at 35%. Really natural addition to limoncello, lemon drops, mojitos, really nice flavor. Given that it's based on our rye, that pepperiness from the rye actually pushes these forward, the flavor profile forward, and allows you to sort of pull back on the sugar, so you're not left with an overly sweet cocktail by any means necessary. Also, our orange coming in at full strength, 40% alcohol. Obviously, your margaritas are a big hit here, but my personal favorite, the Corpse Survivor #2, absolute smash, huge hit. And you're thinking somewhere in between your Cointreau, somewhere in between your Pierre Ferrand dry Curacao, something like that, where you're going to have that little bit of restraint, but a big orange flavor, almost like a zested orange right in your mouth. It's actually so lovely. One of my favorites here is this bitter. So we noticed that these Aperol spritzes were really starting to take the market by storm. And at 30% alcohol, here you are looking at a lower proof alcohol that is competing with some of those big boys, as I mentioned, somewhere right in between the two that you would expect. A little bit of restrained sweetness, but a really powerful flavor profile without being too bitter, without being too sweet. And that's particularly why I love this one. I always found myself blending these two competitors to make that profile. And now I have something that I can just go to right off the bat, right out of the bottle. Negronis, Boulevardiers, those sorts of things. Doesn't really need a lot of attention to know what to do with that, but absolutely perfectly balanced. And last but not least, we have our elderflower. So I always kind of joke, if you don't know what elderflower tastes like by now, you probably haven't been drinking or never had a drop of alcohol in your life. But when coming into the elderflower conversation, we knew that we had to do something different. And what that was is, again, sourcing natural ingredients, using pure spring water, and just doing this as naturally and appropriately as possible. And here again, with our ethos of natural, less sugar, more on the health and wellness side of things than just pushing out a product that we think people are going to suck down. We really wanted to make something that we can stand behind. And that's been the ethos of Chopin Distillery since its inception, making the best quality product in the market that we know people can feel good about drinking. So this coming in at 25% ABV is our lowest on the alcohol scale here. So we're really starting to tap into that no and low cocktail craze. And with that, I'm going to finish a little bit over time, but I think that's okay with this group. The French 75, the elderflower gimlet, it's a really easy addition to pretty much anything. I throw it in bubbly water by itself. But I really want to say thank you all for your time. Really an honor to be a part of this panel. And we look forward to seeing you all out at our favorite bars. Thanks so much.
Joel, you're right on time. I don't know what you're talking about.
Perfect.
And now actually I know, you know, that in Poland, Amaro is called Czeszka. So I appreciate that.
That's right. What, regionally appropriate. So the town of Shesk has been making this spirit for so long. And you'll find other towns that will call it something similar, but it is more of a local and hyper regional thing. And the town that we're making it in is Shesk, and Czeszka was the name of it. So, but it's, gosh, I can never remember it. It's KCZYSKA. So you can imagine that putting that on a bottle is going to be a little bit of a challenge.
Yeah. Yeah, but you know what? I learned something, and I hope our audience did. I hope our panelists did. Thank you for to our panelists. By the way, you're all amazing. I have learned. I know. I sort of understood the difference between sour mash and sweet mash, but thanks to Tim for going through that with us. Thank you to everyone, to Jean, to Jeff, to Dustin. We very, very much appreciate you guys. That is our show. Thank you again. Don't forget to read about this in the September-October tasting panel. I'm Senior Spirits Editor Jesse Birschbach, ending our Spectrum of Spirits webinar to Nirvana Smells Like Teen Spirit. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Don't forget to answer the questions to our panelists in the Q&A, in the chat. There were a lot of great questions. Thank you to our audience. Thank you. Take care, y'all.